Hello and welcome to Power Talk. I'm Chris Bishop. Now I'm looking forward to another robust debate on one of Africa's greatest issues, energy. In this show we'll be looking into the future, trying to find out where the world of energy is going. Where are the innovations that will take the industry forward and where are they coming from? Now I have four experts with me in this field. I have Dr. Lennon, Group Executive for Sustainability at Eskom, Radhika Perrot, Senior Researcher at MISTRA, Dr. Kelvin Kemm of Stratek, and Otto, Technical Advisor for Renewable Energy at SANEDI. So just to start off with, gentlemen, a robust debate ahead of us. If I could just a little statement from each of you is where you see innovation coming in the energy industry in Africa, starting with you, Andre.
Well, Chris, I think, yes, obviously we want to think about the technology innovation. I think it's more a way of applying the current technology that we have, because there are different ways you can do it. And I think that's what we're seeing coming through now, which we will go later more in depth.
Dr. Kelvin Kemm.
Well, Chris, there's a difference between innovation as an idea that comes to one and an actual practical application of that thing. So anybody can come up with an idea. You can be having a dream one night and you come up with an idea. It doesn't have to be a qualified engineer or scientist. It can be anybody, but then you've got to be able to take that to people who can look at it in reality and find out, is this idea something that can really work? So everybody's encouraged to try.
Ready.
In the case of developing countries, most of the technologies that we have are imported or they're transferred from the northern countries. So essentially it means, how do these countries adapt to these technologies to suit the local conditions of the developing countries such as Africa? I think that is where the innovation will be in.
Stephen.
So Chris, where does innovation come from? It's all around us. We're living it every day in the energy sector in South Africa. We're building the world's biggest dry-cooled coal-fired power stations as we speak. We've got one of the most successful renewable energy programs. We've got a massive rollout of some huge transmission infrastructure. And on end-use energy efficiency, there's some great innovations there, not just about the technologies, but about the processes. And we've got one of the most successful energy efficiency programs in the world. So innovation comes from all around us, and it's something that we're living in the energy sector every day.
So Radhika, I mean, just one question a lot of people ask is that all these innovations we're seeing now, is it gentlemen in long white coats in laboratories, or is it just Joe Public sitting at home dreaming?
No, I do not think that's the case for, especially as I mentioned earlier, it's not for developing countries. So many developing countries, they have very restricted public budget that they can invest into R&D or lab-based innovations. So policies, and in particular market-creating policies, are a critical component of innovation. And I think in the context of developing countries, technological innovations and institutional changes, they go hand in hand. And this is also because policies, they enable the diffusion and the implementation and including development of renewable energies or clean energies or new technologies.
Dr. Kelvin Kemm, I mean, what's something that's impressed you in recent years, you know, and someone just came up with like that?
Well, Chris, I think what's important to establish at the beginning is that we've got to learn to not try to follow the first world. We mustn't think that they have the answer and it's a case of us following in their footsteps. They're completely different in size. The distance between Pretoria, for example, and Cape Town is the same distance as Rome to London. And it's quite amazing, you know, half of the power of the Western Cape comes from the nuclear power station on the Kubu. The other half comes from the coal fields that are beyond Pretoria. So imagine London getting supplied with half of its power from Rome. Now these are the sort of things we do here very successfully, but we've got to stop thinking that we have to look at the grid system of Europe or the so-and-so system of one of the first world countries. We've got to look at our own circumstances and the courage to go from there.
Andre, what's your take on that?
I think you need both. You need the people in the white coats in the laboratories, but you also need people on the ground. Classical example is, I think years back there was a person, Trevor Byles, who introduced the wind-up radio. And he got his inspiration from South Africa, our unique circumstances. And today I think there's a company, Free Play now, and that's a big company. So, and that was not a laboratory. There's somebody that looked what is the situation out there, he looked what is available, and he put it two together. And I think that's what's happening.
But that's one of the things that's always struck me, Kelvin, is the fact that, you know, when Soccer City was open for the World Cup here in 2010, a lot of people looked at the catching of the rainwater on the roof to supply the stadium with water and said, oh, that's a brilliant innovation. And the first thing, as a journalist, what I thought, why didn't anyone come up with that years ago? What do you think the driving forces for innovation?
Well, you know, with innovation, it can be from either side. It can be a push or it can be a pull. Sometimes one looks and you see a problem and it worries one's mind, and suddenly you come up with an idea. Other times somebody goes out and finds something that will work and says, how can I apply this? So it can come in either direction. Now, you know, in the case of energy now, we are about 85% electrified in South Africa at the moment. The remaining 15% is not just a case of extending the grid and going there. These are people living on hilltops and in inaccessible types of places. So many times the innovation is some small system that will apply to a small unit or some particular industrial application that you can build there. It's not just rolling out the big grid to everybody else. So there's all sorts of angles in this jigsaw puzzle that one can look at.
Radhika, now you've studied this innovation in energy in developing countries.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that Africa has a dearth of power for it. I mean, sad to say, most of the people, or many people on the continent, haven't switched on a light bulb for the first time in their lives. How much do you think necessity could be the mother of invention?
I think it's estimated almost 2/3 of the population sub-Saharan Africa are without energy access, and almost 85% of the people who live in the rural areas, they don't have access to the grid. So, and in regard to this, I would like to mention a documentary by a German filmmaker. He talked of Karl Fechner. He talked about energy autonomy as the future, energy autonomy as the fourth revolution. So in that sense, he talked about it was a vision of a global society where the entire society was reconstructed and energy was supplied 100% from renewable energy. So in that sense, this kind of a vision actually makes sense to African countries where there is a very critical lack of access to the grid problem. And one of my friends had pointed out recently that the energy requirements of a single household or a community in a rural area anywhere in Africa is so insignificant that it does not justify the setting up of large transmission lines or investing a huge amount in huge energy infrastructure.
One of the perennial problems, Steve, I mean, that's part of one of the things that faces Eskom, the parastatal. What do you say to that?
You know, Chris, we must always remember that if you're going to aspire to get universal access to electricity throughout Southern Africa, it's not just about providing electricity to domestic consumers. It's about energizing economies. And that's what we have to look at. And I do agree that there is a view that says in the long term, when you start looking at some of the very exciting technologies that are being developed, some of them in South Africa, is that you will have a system that is consists of a multiplicity of small generators, etc. But never forget that in spite of the fact that you may have a low demand in a poor household, you still need to power commercial buildings, you still need to power manufacturing facilities if you want energy access to be truly sustainable. And so when you talk about energy in the power sector, part of it is also about seeing how is it that you can get advanced forms of energy, electricity, clean cooking, heating, etc., into domestic consumers, the commercial sector, the industrial sector, so that we can actually move the economies forward. I do think that that there's too many that just focus on domestic consumption, and that's not sustainable. The work that the UN Secretary General has commissioned through the Sustainable Energy for All initiative has really been emphasizing this, and we've been playing a big role there. I think that if you look at what we've been able to do in South Africa, Kelvin spoke about the fact 85% electrified from 30% in 1994. Huge step forward. Massive innovations in driving that cost of electrification down. We can carry on doing that, and we can replicate that in other Southern African countries.
Well, speaking about innovations, Andre, you were personally involved in the Darling project, which is the only initiated a wind farm next to a small town in the Western Cape of South Africa called Darling, which I understand now is providing power to nearby Cape Town. But from the reports I've read, it wasn't easy. You had many, many problems down the years. What sort of problems can you have with these kind of innovations?
I think coming back to those years, as I mentioned earlier, that was in the beginning of days when renewable energy in South Africa, we were very much thinking of that's a solution for the off-grid areas. It was not really seen as a mainstream energy. And so there was a few, let's say, champions that was daring to say, but it's not just in a rural, it's also in the urban environment. And so you had some people that came up with these ideas, let's try it out in an urban environment. But obviously, the mainstream, we had Eskom, we have municipalities generating electricity, and people are used to that. How can we as individuals start generating our electricity? So that was a whole learning curve for us. As I said, like, you need to go and negotiate a power purchase wheeling agreement. With somebody must buy you electricity, otherwise you can't get a license and stuff. The issue of power wheeling with Eskom, those were new things for everybody, and it took a certain amount of years. Also the issue of environmental impact assessment. You are thinking you're introducing a green technology, so everybody should be happy. Oh well, that was not the case. That was a big issue. So those were the learning curves, and I'm happy to say these days it's much easier now, and it paved the way to go forward. Okay, today we have the big Department of Energy programs and stuff, but you need to go through those learning stages. You can't just jump in, as I said, take a European technology or application, put it in, you think it's going to work, and we're still learning.
So Steve, wish to reply to that?
I'd say that the biggest lesson you have to learn is perseverance. And having been involved in projects like the Eskom Kliphevel wind farm, even our Dish Stirling demonstration we did at the DBSA, the Pebble Bed project, through to the current underground coal gasification project, which is a very successful pilot. Perseverance. These things take many, many years, and you have to constantly solve them. You can never assume that just because you've got a good idea and it has got great potential in the market, that it's just going to automatically make it. You have to continue having very, very solid champions behind it, and often with very deep pockets. In the energy sector, it is not a cheap exercise to take a technology from concept through to a commercial application. It takes a long time and a lot of money.
Well, Dr. Kemm, I mean, this is one of the issues in innovations as well. You've got to make the bright idea and pay for itself. I mean, how difficult is that in this day and age?
No, very much, Chris. In fact, I want to agree with what Steve Lennon said earlier, and that is that one must look at the big commercial amounts of power. It's not just a case of trying now to politically give everybody a bit of electricity. You've got to be able to make big power available for expansion and industrialization, and that means baseload power that you can rely on, which also means you don't necessarily have to continuously expand the grid. You can have separate grids as far as I'm concerned, particularly when you look in other African countries, the size of these African countries. Why not have small radial grids spreading out to industrial areas, and then look for innovative solutions like things like wind and solar and so on. There's many applications where you can take the industrial application to the power rather than the other way around. We have the potential for solar in the Northern Cape, for example. Why not build something like a glass works that makes glass products? We use the heat right there. Why try and bring the electricity all the way from the Northern Cape into, say, the suburban area of Cape Town? So I think there's a lot of things, not only how exactly do you make the power, but how are you actually going to utilize it? What are you really going to do? So you need to look at this whole thing in a much more distant image initially to find individual solutions.
Well, we're talking about solar there, Radhika. You said there was a project in Zambia, which, again, brings to the fore this innovation idea that was a success. So just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's one of the many hundreds of projects that's happening currently in Africa. And this company is called Shared Value, and they are supplying low-cost, efficient solar home systems to houses in rural areas in Zambia. And the capacity is around 10 watts, and it costs somewhere between $50 to $150. But the technology is got in from Indonesia. But then with the supply of this equipment, what it is doing is that it is creating the need for after-sales services. And what is innovative about this company is to be able to supply these solar home systems. They are tapping into existing distribution networks, such as coal distribution networks. And so those are the kind of innovative off-grid solutions that will answer the energy excess problem.
So Steve, as well, at Eskom, talking about innovations, you've got a system whereby if I'm working at Eskom, I've got an idea, I can take it forward and the company will take it up, try and see it through. I mean, this is quite rare even in this day and age.
Yeah, it's called the Innovation Circuit. It's open to all of our employees, and they can put in ideas, whether it is how to reduce the cost coffee in a canteen or whether it is a smart meter technology. And then we have a process behind that examines the idea. So it's not just a matter of someone saying, oh, well, that's a good idea, and then it kind of disappears into nowhere, which is your kind of suggestion box mentality. This has a process that actually looks at it and then determines whether that idea can be implemented immediately or whether we feed it into our research program for further development, further research. And the individual employee gets, we have a kind of, it's almost like an award system, so they get points, and from that they can get certain benefits if they put in a lot of good ideas. It's been working very well. We are using it at the moment to capture ideas throughout the business on how to improve our efficiency and reduce our costs.
And I'll ask the two of you the same question here. I mean, do you think it's born, or do you think it can be trained into people to come up with energy ideas?
I think it can be undoubtedly trained to some degree. I'm involved from time to time with innovative thinking courses and so on, and many people come along and they sit in a room and they think, well, I'm not imaginative. But start to draw it out of them and say, what ideas have you got? You'd be surprised what comes out of basically ordinary everyday people once they're given an opportunity to ponder and to shoot from the hip a little bit. And one's encouraged to sort of let these ideas flow and then see if what is initially a crazy idea is practical. You shouldn't limit your mind in the first instance by saying, look, that's crazy, I better not say anything about it. It's much better to let all these funny things come out and then in cold, hard light afterwards, have a look at this thing and say, is this practical? So I believe there's many, many solutions, particularly here in Africa, because we're so different from the first world. We've got to go and have a look at our long distances, our harsh climates and places and so on, and say, what can we do? Also, we do not have to make electricity all the time. You can actually just use the heat, because so much electricity is turned into heat for melting and molding and so on and so forth, that there are times when you can say take solar into heat and just use the heat to do something. You don't have to put it into electricity, then from electricity back into heat at a later stage. So there's a lot of ideas that one can come up with.
So Andre, what do you think? People are born with crazy ideas or they acquire them?
I think you get them, but I think also that it depends on the environment. If we look at our environment today, like the electricity prices are going up, people are start thinking, but I have a PV panel out there and I use it to pump some water or whatever. Can't I use it for my needs and stuff? So I think it also depends on the environment. The environment also induced that thinking, but it was used like this, maybe I can use it like that. Coming back to the issue of energization, as Dr. Lennon mentioned, I know those days in the DOE we had huge big programs, solar home system programs going. And at that stage it was very much a service delivery, a light in the household or whatever. But what we also realize is maybe a better way of using those energies and energize the economy in those places. Sometimes you don't see it as visual, but there is energizing. Once you energize those things, people appreciate so more, because then they say this energy also brings me something in my pocket, as if you just give them a light and they can see how poor they are. So I think it's a combination of both.
Radhika, what do you think of the model in developing countries from your studies?
I think, I would like to give the example of the solar PV, which was designed at University of Johannesburg. So that precisely also talks to what everyone else is talking, that what we need is a market push and market pull, or technology push and technology pull factors to determine to take a technology from the lab to the outside. So what was missing in the solar PV case was there was no market creating policies in South Africa to be able to take the technology from the lab into the market. So we need policymakers, and and also we need a very creative, maybe creative or innovative financing schemes on how to, you need finance to be able to take the technology out into the market as well, and those kind of things. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, there's actually many examples of where we haven't done well enough in South Africa, and one of my roles is chair of the National Advisory Council on Innovation, which advises government on innovation policy. And this point is a very important one, is that I believe that we've got this incredible innovation potential, proven innovation potential in South Africa. But what we do is that we let ideas develop to the stage of, let's say, a pre-commercial point. And then we go and we say to those developers, okay, now you've got to compete with the rest of the world on this particular product, even if it's got functionality that is unique and very special. We do need to build on the incentive schemes that can turn those, let's say, pre-commercial technologies into globally competitive technologies. We've got technologies right now such as the thin film photovoltaic, which has a potential at scale to be lowest cost PV in the world. We've got advanced metering technologies, which Eskom has had a role to play we have interest from players around the world to license this technology, that they're saying, come on guys, you aren't using it widely in South Africa, so why should we use it in the States or Europe? We need to get a lot smarter about taking those really great inventions that we have here in South Africa and putting them on the world stage.
And what about entrepreneurs? Where do you think they come into this whole thing? People with perhaps not deep pockets, but with deep personalities who can go through all these barriers. What do you think?
Well, because I think the entrepreneurs are very important, because at the end of the day, this whole exercise has got to be profitable. One can't keep giving electricity away all the time, otherwise the economy will just collapse at the end of the day. So it's got to be profitable in the sense that there must be a return eventually. So the entrepreneur is the sort of person that goes out there and puts his own neck on the block and says, I'm coming to do this and I'm either going to succeed or not. And I think that there's a great role for them to play, and there must be opportunity given. The laws and the regulations and such must be built in such a way that people with innovative ideas can go out and try, and that they can, say, sell electricity and so on. So there's a big space for private producers of electricity. Admittedly, electricity is dangerous. You can get killed by it, so you can't just give everybody a free hand to wire the neighborhood by themselves. There must be some regulations, but there must be encouragement to allow people to go and give it a shot and come up with ideas. And I think you'll definitely get them, and the entrepreneurs will step forward. And South Africans, by the way, are very innovative, as Steve says. Just recently, an American colleague of mine who was in South Africa was saying to me, golly, you South Africans are so good. Why don't you have more self-confidence? Wherever I walk around in South Africa, I see you guys are so good, but you don't know it. And he says, go out there and be a bit more confident. And I think that's very true. We sit here at the bottom of Africa looking up at Europe saying, those guys must be good. We are actually very good, as Steve says, and it's time that people step forward with a lot more self-confidence.
What do you think, Andre? I mean, particularly, I was going to ask the two of you this question. We're seeing a lot of entrepreneurs coming in with renewable energy and what have you. I mean, the other week we were writing a story about a bunch of guys, accountants, quite nice, comfortable life. They've tossed it all up and they've gone to go and open a wind farm in the Eastern Cape. You probably know them. What sort of entrepreneurs are you getting coming, to try to innovate in energy?
I think you get all sorts of them. You get some of those guys that will not take no for an answer, and you also need them, whether it makes sense or not. You need to knock some people so that they do something, but you also need on the other side those that take more a pragmatic approach looking at economies. But I agree what Dr. Lennon is saying. I think there is a lot of these ideas out there, but how do you take it from that idea to something that's useful? And also coming back to South Africa, because many times what happens is you have these guys have these ideas, guys and girls, and then you see 2-3 years they start somewhere in Europe or America. I mean, we need to incubate all those different entities.
Stephen, you're at the heart of it.
Absolutely. The historical view has been that the power sector is all about big chunky investments, tens of billions of rands or dollars, you name it, it's big money. But if you have a look at where the power sector is going today, there's a lot of space for entrepreneurs to participate. Yes, you've got it in the independent power producers in the renewable space, relatively small investments, nice returns, backed up, it's relatively safe investment because it's backed up by power purchase agreement, lots of nice guarantees. But there's a lot more space there. So if you look at, say, energy efficiency, the way people use electricity and what's happening in that area right now, whether it is motors, pumps, drives, lighting, energy management systems, there's some great technologies out there developed by South Africans that are on the market. And then start looking now, take a 20 to 30 year view of the power sector. When you start seeing a smart grid, the Internet of Things as opposed to the Internet of People and Information, but the Internet of Things becoming a reality, well then all of those startups that you've seen in the IT space are going to move into the energy space. When you have got machines being connected, whether it is a domestic consumer or commercial consumer, or industrial consumer, you've got a multiplicity of generation sources, you've got smart metering, everything comes together. So this is the market of the future, is the power sector. And it's not just for the big players. If anything, it's going to be for a lot of small players.
So, Radhika, what do you think of that? I mean, is it going to come from grassroots level? And are there like all these teeming brains there ready to set up a new Silicon Valley for
it will.
energy?
It will. I hope it does. Especially because if you look at, there are innovations, a lot of innovations happening in South Africa, but you don't see as much of entrepreneurial activities if you compare it to countries like India or China. And what's missing is, I think, there are policies that do not nurture entrepreneurial activities. Sometimes they miss out, they don't talk to each other. And also the way the financial markets and banking sector is structured in South Africa, they tend to always favor large companies. So entrepreneurial firms, they need nurturing, and somebody has to trust them and put money in and take risks. And I think that is what is lacking.
Well, there's a case in point for a veteran in the industry like yourself. I mean, if I go into the bank this afternoon and say, listen, I've got a fantastic idea. I'm going to go on top of a mountain and I'm going to build something that's going to power the whole of Johannesburg. They're going to look at me probably skeptically.
Absolutely.
I mean, isn't that a problem?
That's a very valid point, because what is important, we've been saying here that anybody in your dreams or in your bath or something can come up with ideas. Yes, that's true. However, there's the reality of the laws of physics. And if you violate laws of physics, it will not work. And there's also far too many people that come along and say, look, so-and-so, so. You say, that violates the second law of thermodynamics. The person says, don't worry about that. It's going to work anyway. Now, I've had many of those people come to me. For hundreds of years, mankind looked for perpetual motion, for example, and perpetual motion violates the second law of thermodynamics, therefore it cannot work. You cannot get more energy out than you put in. End of story. So if somebody comes up with an idea, it's encouraged that anybody can, but then when you go to the professionals, if the professionals look and say, this cannot work that way, or something, you can't just say, forget it, I'm going ahead. Now, on that topic too, now while we are looking at, say, small energy, like in your backyard, you can have your own wind turbine or something, as Steve said earlier, it's the big stuff that's important. Now, if you look at other African countries, for example, nuclear, we're planning to build 9,600 megawatts of new nuclear in South Africa, which represents 3 big power stations, which will be on the coast because they need the seawater for cooling. But there's a lot of movement around the world to build much smaller reactors, like the South African pebble bed modular reactor design of a while ago. And those are like 5% the size of a big reactor, and they don't need to be on the beach, basically. Those nuclear reactors can go in any African country. There's already 21 African countries who've indicated to the International Atomic Energy Agency they're interested in pursuing nuclear as a future. And that's to be encouraged, because the fuel volumes are so small that you can move the fuel volumes around, you can stockpile them and so on. So there's a lot of practicality about where exactly is the fuel you're going to move, what is it you're actually going to use to power it. So one mustn't only think of small little backyard things, but you ought to find out how do you get rather big baseload power to industrialize, as Steve said earlier, because it's those bigger commercial ventures which are going to grow the economies of countries.
Hold that thought there, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to a short break now. When we come back, we'll be talking more on innovation in energy, but also we're going to our audience for questions from the floor. Do stay with us. Okay, welcome back to Power Talk, where we're discussing the importance of innovation in the energy sector. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, still in the studio, I have my panel of experts, Dr. Stephen Lennon from Eskom, Radhika Perrot from MISTRA, Dr. Kelvin Kemm from Stratek, and Otto from SANEDI. So, in your particular specialist areas, starting with you, Steve, just to throw things forward, what do you see coming up in the next 2 years?
Next 2 years, I think you're going to start seeing the evolution of a very interesting dynamic between the big systems, and I'm not just talking about South Africa here, I'm talking about Southern Africa, so the Southern African power pool, as you start seeing more big projects develop outside of South Africa and trading into that pool. And then electricity consumers taking ownership of electricity themselves, taking much more ownership of how they're using electricity. We've had some great successes in South Africa already. We can do a lot more. Commercial building owners saying, I don't like my electricity bill, I want it to go down. Can we do it with energy management systems, energy efficiency, or photovoltaics on our rooftops? And the same thing happening, we're already starting to see it with the domestic consumers. That will be in 2 years. The really interesting time is going to be the next 10 to 20 years. And that's another story.
Okay. Radhika, what do you think?
I think in terms of, because most of the energy technologies new energy technologies that we are talking about is being imported, and we cannot reinvent the wheel, sit here in the labs and redesign, or maybe a windmill. So what do we need is smart policies, and how we negotiate the policies to maximize the benefits that come with these technologies that are being transferred at the moment through the renewable energy IPP programs. And it's how we adapt also to the technologies, and how do we, in addition to that, what we need is innovation, capability, skills, knowledge and skills, know-how on how to implement these technologies. So I think we would reach a fairly advanced stage in 2 years.
Yourself?
Well, Chris, in 100 years' time, when people are going to the moon for Christmas holidays and things like this, I'm convinced that the world will be running on nuclear power, predominantly, because there's so much uranium and thorium around, and there's nothing you can do with uranium and thorium other than use it for fuel in a reactor or make doorstops out of it. Whereas coal, of course, can be turned into Sassol's petrol and diesel and so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a pity one burns the coal when you could actually turn it into petrol. So I see nuclear as a very fundamental right now and into the immediate future. Now, it's not just big nuclear plants like Koeberg on the coastline, but as I said earlier on, smaller ones, 5% the size of that can be deployed right across Africa. So there's no reason why any African country can't gear up right now for nuclear power. That means putting nuclear legislation on their books, putting all the processes in place. Because it's only a few years away now that we will be able to put in these smaller reactors. So that one mustn't think that these things are beyond your majority of African countries. Not at all. They can all get into it, because also one must remember, here in most African countries, the immediate priority is to double electricity consumption and then do it again and again and again. Many countries, 5, 10, 15, 20% electrified only. The only moral thing they can do is radically increase the amount of power that they use. We're not just talking about small percentage increase, we're talking about big power, and that is done with big systems such as nuclear power. Others have their place, but we have to look at the backbone of the countries.
Andre, and the future, what's in the wind, do you think?
Well, as I say, from wind at the moment, we see all these big wind turbines going up. I think that will still be going on, but I do foresee there will also be emphasis going on the urban, your urban environments, where people is now realizing specialized smaller wind turbines, combination with solar, net grid, net metering as they call it. I do foresee there's going to be a development that obviously the laws and whether you can generate your electricity yourself, that's a whole issue on its own. And I think then the other issue is also something we sometimes forget is the synergies between renewable energy, energy efficiency, issues of sustainability. We sometimes look them in compartments. I think once we start combining those concepts, we're also going to see a whole new generation of ideas and technologies coming up. And then the issue of also water, and there's a saying that in the future maybe water is going to determine our energy technology. South Africa is a water scarce country. So I feel that's going to play, I think, a much bigger role in future. And then in general, I believe the self-generation, the option where people is going to say, but I can also start doing this. It's going to happen, but it's going to have its challenges.
Okay, well it's that point now where we go to the audience who've been listening to get some ideas on exactly what they've taken from this. So, lady in the front, first question.
Thank you. My name is Vanida, and I'm from Shanduvan Pty Limited. I just have two questions. My first one is centered on innovation in renewables, and my understanding of innovation is that it should yield in efficiencies. And if you look at the renewables programs within South Africa, they have been highly subsidized, and we haven't truly reached the efficiencies that we would have liked to have seen. And my question is, have we not reached a point where we need to accept that renewables will never really compete with the base loads and achieve those efficiencies, and that they rather have a very localized, and if I may say, a more user-specific application? And that's where we should be putting our energies, where we can get the true returns at the user level. And my second question is allied to the first. That our solutions around innovation need to be country-specific and have scalability. And we're only going to achieve that if we recalibrate at a policy level and accept that we're a uranium-rich, coal-rich, and hopefully one day gas-rich country. And based on that, perhaps applying the Pareto principle, and I know this may not be palatable, but 80% of our energy should be going towards gearing innovation in those areas. Thank you.
Gentlemen, who wishes to...
Let me just kick off saying that, yes, the point on the renewables is true at the moment, but it's not necessarily going to stay stay true into the future. If you look at what's happened to the price of photovoltaic panels, and remember in South Africa we have a very good solar resource as opposed to countries that require heavy subsidies like Germany, for example. Price of photovoltaic panels is coming down, I think in recent years over the 3-year period, 75%. And we anticipate seeing that continuing around about 10-11% a year. That makes it competitive on things like this roof, commercial buildings. But I agree, you're still going to need to have the big backbone system because you have still got aluminium smelters and ferrochrome smelters, etc., that underpin an economy. So you're still going to need to have those large-scale entities. What could be a big game changer if you start getting very low-cost energy storage happening in the system. So that definitely has merit. The point about where should we be focusing our innovation, I agree we need to be putting a lot more innovation into things like clean coal technology. We have a resource, we have an existing very strong, high-emitting energy base. It needs to change. So things like augmentation of coal plants with renewables, solar augmentation, solar preheating can be a great concept if you can get the cost down. Things like underground coal gasification, low carbon emitting, clean coal technology. There's lots of very promising technologies. Obviously, the whole gas market, all of these things will mean that we can have a vibrant energy sector into the future that's using the resources we have available.
Well, Chris, that was a very well articulated question, I must say. And that brings me to the point as well, that the innovation is not just on the fundamental energy system. Take the nuclear new build, for example, the 9,600 megawatts that's coming. The government has indicated that they're looking for 50% localization as a target on the first reactor. That means all the pumps and valves and pipes and cabling and electronic circuits and all sorts of things in that reactor. We're talking about hundreds of billions of rand. You can come up with innovations how to, in South Africa, make the valves, how in South Africa to make the pumps, how in South Africa to get the welding right. It's not just like welding your fence post around a swimming pool. This welding is serious welding. You have to x-ray each one and check that there's no fundamental cracks in it and so on. So there's a massive amount of innovation that can be done within a major system and not only coming up with a new way of producing the energy. So there's lots and lots of opportunity for people and lots of money to be made in these things. And of course, making the money is what keeps the system going.
Okay, we'll go back to our audience. Second question, lady here in the front.
Good afternoon. Karen Ayerton from Standard Bank. We've had incredible policy innovation over the last number of years that has unlocked unprecedented investment from the private sector into energy systems, as well as unlocked entrepreneurial capability around energy supply. It seems to me that unlocking further stuff is going to be hindered by the current sort of very sophisticated regime we have in order for somebody to supply power into the grid. Given that decentralized systems also decentralize the risk, you know, if a big boiler goes bang on one big power station that's providing a very significant part of the energy supply, you have a big problem. If it's a smaller system that encounters a problem, there's less risk to the entire system. Surely we should be not only focusing on the big is beautiful, which seems to be the mantra of some organizations, but looking more and more at decentralizing that risk, encouraging smaller players into the market. And I don't mean one man, one solar geyser. I'm talking about small companies doing things on their factory rooftops, doing things including energy efficiency, but also energy supply. If nothing else, surely that could buy Eskom more time for maintenance, more time for running the system. So my question to the panel is, what more can we do in terms of regulatory innovation to unlock more of that potential? And secondly, what can we do to try and make sure that the gains we've made in the renewable energy field over the last while are not lost because we take our foot off the pedal and all of those localization projects start to founder because we don't have tranche 2, tranche 3, tranche 4.
Let's just start off on the last point that Karen was making, is that there's a lot of growth that's going to happen still in the renewable space in South Africa. We've only committed to around about 3,000 megawatts. The integrated resource plan says that by 2030 we would have 17 to 18,000. So there's lots and lots of growth. we do have to keep the foot on the pedal. But I do suggest that we are moving to the stage where we shouldn't be looking at incentives any longer on things like rooftop photovoltaics. You know, we recently did a business case in Eskom, which was accepted by our board, looking at our buildings, where we would put photovoltaic panels on our commercial buildings and save money in the process. Not a cent of subsidy. Just because of the electricity prices that we're paying in our commercial buildings, and the fact that in your commercial buildings, you are using the electricity during the day at a time that the sun is generating, or the panels are generating the best electricity. So increasingly, you're starting to see, when you've got a good business case, you're going to start seeing a lot of these small owners taking ownership of their own electricity, especially for commercial buildings. And then a final point, I agree with Karen, is that to de-risk the power sector, more small units, but not necessarily tiny units, but more small units. So should the next coal station be another massive Kusile and Medupi? I don't think so. I think it should be more smaller units, maybe 200-300 megawatt units, definitely not of this scale. It's lower risk and it makes more sense.
Well, I just ask you a question, Radhika, on the way here. I mean, we're talking here about, I saw the story about Eskom's roof panels. Don't you think there's a case in Africa for saying if you want planning permission for a new office block, you've got to have a solar panel thing on the roof, otherwise you're not going to get it? Do you think there's a case for that? I mean, a lot of people say that's draconian.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, those are consumer behavioral change trigger mechanisms. And in the case, like, for a long time in South Africa, the cost of electricity was quite low, so they didn't have an incentive to switch maybe from coal-based to renewable energies. So in that parallel, it would pressure consumers to install maybe a solar or wind small rooftop in there. But the other issue in like you said, Steve said, that it should make economic sense. So what is the incentive or benefit you have to replace your current system and say, okay, I shall install a rooftop wind, and it'll drive all the electric power in my house. So, but in other countries like in Europe or America, they have a net metering basis where if you produce excess electricity in your house, you're able to sell it back into the grid. So that's the facility we don't have here.
Okay, back to the audience. Next question.
I'm Zanele Mlambo from Palace Group. My question is directed at Dr. Stephen from Eskom. You mentioned in passing smart metering, and I'm very interested in knowing, I've got two questions, but they are both related. Firstly, do you believe smart metering is a case for energy efficiency, meaning it is part of energy efficiency? I certainly do, and as a follow-up to that question, I want to know what Eskom is doing. What role are you playing in encouraging and, in fact, incentivizing local smart metering developers? Because I see a lot of the smart metering is happening based on not municipalities per se, but in regions. But Eskom could play, in my opinion, a bigger role and a more significant role in encouraging these particular systems and these particular localized products to actually be spread out, because obviously you are the only utility in South Africa. So I'd really like to know what you think on that point.
Smart metering is definitely a key element of the power sector into the future. Does it play a role in energy efficiency? Yes, it does, and it just pushes so many buttons. So with smart metering, you can deal with net metering, which means that if you're generating at your home or your business, you can put electricity back into the grid. You can deal with revenue collection, so you can connect and disconnect. You have network visibility, which means you can pick up problems in your network, whether it is hotspots, whether it is outages, you can pick them up down to the level of the individual consumer, which could be a home. You can use it to send signals to the consumer about how they're using electricity. Time of use metering, say, is that the price of electricity over peak is going to be 3 times as much as it is off peak. And you can let the consumer see real-time information about what the electricity is costing them. And that puts power into the hands of the consumer, as opposed to getting a bill where your meter's read every 3 months. And so definitely smart metering has a huge role to play. I don't think we're doing enough to promote domestic smart metering. I'm aware of very, very innovative, world-class smart metering technologies in South Africa, a lot of it driven by need, as Kelvin was saying earlier on. So, for example, to manage demand and to be able to reduce supply to individual consumers. But bear in mind that when it comes to smart metering, a lot of smart metering is at the end-use customer. The majority of end-use customers in South Africa are behind the municipal boundaries. So the work that some of the big municipalities are doing on smart metering now is really must be encouraged. And when you see smart metering rolled out throughout the country, it opens the door for a whole bunch of things, products and services we haven't even thought about yet.
Next question.
Hi, Amanda Watson from The Citizen. We've got the technology, we've got the innovators. Do we have the support staff? Do we have the artisans? Do we have the technicians? Do we have the engineers to implement this stuff and keep it running?
I would say yes, but, so let's give as an example, you know, when we started the solar water heating program, the very early assessments that we did said this program is not going to work because we haven't got enough qualified plumbers and electricians that will install the million that's currently the target. So what you have to do in any of these new, not necessarily new technology, but any technology that you're rolling out, so whether it's rooftop PV or the solar water heating program, is make sure that that is accompanied by a strong localization program that includes the development of the local skills. But make sure it's a program that is sustainable. You don't want to develop your local skills and then find a few years down the road they're stranded and they can't have jobs because the program has ended. It's got to start growing itself.
And yourself, I mean, what do you think about that? You've been in the industry a long time.
I think that's a very good question, and it's something that needs to be given attention. I agree with what Steve said. You know, if I look particularly, say, at the nuclear business, we have everything that we want from the point of view of the skills in one long line, so to speak, but not enough. We have leading nuclear scientists, we have leading nuclear engineers, we have all the way, and we have artisans, welding, and so on and so on. There's nothing where there's a big hole in South Africa that we don't understand, but we certainly don't have enough. The plans for the nuclear new build is something like 250,000 extra artisans. Now, as far as the localization program is concerned, that also will only survive if we export. So we've got to export nuclear components around the world, which is quite feasible. The idea is not to try and go for 100% localization. That's as bad as zero. You want to go somewhere in the middle, so we're exporting and importing, therefore other people want to trade with us. But clearly, we need to develop many more people, but we have the skills here to build on, so we can do that. But it is a challenge, and something which I think is an exciting challenge, because we can develop the economy so much.
But isn't this a question of, goes back to government policy though, about who this country and other countries like it in Africa are training? I mean, how many people pour out of university every year with all kinds of degrees which are not very conducive or practical when it comes to energy? I mean, don't you think there's a question for government to be pushing and expanding the areas that we're talking about, training engineers, technicians? What do you think, Andre?
Chris, yes, I know, like in the wind sector, when we realized this big program going on in wind, a renewable energy program, and what we also learn after Darling thing, you sometimes think once you sign off all these agreements and there the plant goes and it will run on itself. It doesn't. It needs operation and maintenance. And this is one of the, in wind side now, we have a center down in Cape Town now that's busy training these technicians, sending them overseas until we have trainers that can do it. And I believe government, in that whole initiative, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy, everybody was involved in this initiative. So there's definitely a realization of that fact. And I think the change is not, you need skilled PhDs, MECs and those stuff to do certain things, but you need those other skills also, otherwise somewhere the wheels will come off.
What do you say, Steve? Because I mean, that's one question, isn't it? I've just come back from Mozambique on the cusp of a gas boom. And the greatest fear amongst Mozambicans is that the equipment's going to come in from overseas, the experts are going to come in from overseas, and people are going to end up bystanders at their own energy boom. I mean, what's going to happen?
It can happen, but it is a matter of choice. You can choose whether you're going to let that happen, or you can choose whether you're going to develop a real local industry. Take the Mozambican gas industry. That'll be an industry that'll be around for 20, 30, 50 years. So it makes sense, yes, start off with your imported skills, but develop your local skills. You can take 2 years to develop your basic local skills at an artisan level. To get your top level artisans, your highly specialized welders, etc., you'll take 5 or 6 years. And to get your top engineers, your top specialists, etc., you're talking about 10, 15 years. All of that fits into the lifetime of this industry. So that's why when you look at what we're doing with plants such as Medupi, Kusile, Ngula, Sierra, the wind program, and future nuclear skills, we are starting the training now. We put it in, as Eskom, we put a requirement on our contractors to literally train thousands of artisans as they are building our plants. And those artisans will be available to service our industry into the future and their local skills. And Chris, I just also wanted to mention, if you really want to see what the potential is in South Africa, you must have a look at the Eskom Expo for Young Scientists. These are kids, school kids, that come up with the most amazing ideas. And you say, have you got the raw material to train? You look no further than that. Very, very bright future for our skills.
Kelvin, what do I see you nodding your head there?
Yeah, Chris, that point you made is very, very valid. You know, at the end of last year, the Minister of Education got very excited when we had a 4% improvement in the matric pass rate up to about 84. And she said, let's see if we can't do better in 2014. That sounds good, but you've got to be careful. If we get 4% improvement every year for 5 years, we hit 100% pass rate. Now, nobody in the world is going to take us seriously if we have 100% pass rate in matric. In fact, I think about 80, 84 is about the right mark. If we hit 90, it's getting too high. Now, there's too much concentration on people must get matric to be able to get into life. That's not true. There's a huge number of jobs that people can go into by voluntarily leaving school earlier. It mustn't be something that you're ashamed of because you've left school at age 16 and you haven't got your matric. There's massive amounts of opportunity all over the place, and so we should encourage there to be a pride in people doing work that is really needed by the economy. It doesn't mean you have to go through matric to get it. So I'm very glad you raised that point. It's very important.
But isn't that one thing? I mean, for your study of developing countries, is that there is this unwillingness. I mean, I've heard this before about artisans, people saying, oh, they don't want to get dirty, and they don't want to have to go and do heavy work underground or whatever. Do you think there's an unwillingness for people to take up these kind of jobs, you know, carrying screwdrivers and things? I mean, what do you see?
I'm not aware of it, but
I mean, just an example. I mean, my grandfather is a man who had very little education, but he could take a piece of wood and he could make it into anything you could possibly name. Fantastic skills. But I'm just saying, do you think that's dying out as we look ahead in Africa, or do you think that people are out there who are innovating, who are prepared to do the dirty work and the hard work?
When I used the case of in Zambia, so the entire supplying of the solar systems had created a need for after-sales services. So you start off low at those kind of technician level, and then soon with time you would upgrade and then maybe slowly start producing maybe a component of the, you learn skills. There are technological transfers that happen, spillovers, that you learn your skills and you upgrade and move up the value chain, and that's how you build your capabilities. But Chris, you have to start.
On that one, I mean, is there appetite? Definitely. Just go and visit Medupi and Kusile and go to the top of the boiler houses and you'll see young South African men and women working under some quite extreme conditions and doing an amazing job. So there definitely is appetite, and there's some great careers out there, as Kelvin says, at all levels.
Andre, you think we should be hopeful, or do you think there's a long way to go?
Well, I think we should be hopeful. It's just we need to put the systems in place. We need to identify those people and help them further on. And I think that's where the gap is. We need to do more about that.
But my question in terms of help, what is it? I mean, are we talking like places at university? Are we talking bursaries? Are we talking, I don't know, mentors? What do you think we're talking?
I think some of it is projecting the right image to the public as well. I mean, for example, take the job of being a tool maker. Tool makers are unbelievably skilled people, and we really, really need them. There's a very good tooling initiative going on now to develop tool makers. Also at the Nuclear Energy Corporation of South Africa, NEXA, they've got a program there to develop very skilled tool makers and other artisans up to nuclear standards, which are very high standards. Believe me, those fellows can do magic. And most of the public can't tell the difference between a tool maker, for example, and a fitter and turner. And there's a vast difference. So we need to project a lot of these crafts to the public in general, so that people don't go along and go down false lanes. And I know a couple of black fellows, for example, who told me that when they wanted to become engineers, their parents said, no, you're not going to become like a motor mechanic, you've got to go to university and go and get a BA or something. So they were driven away from engineering because the parents didn't understand what it was. And then many of those jobs like that are very valuable, and we need to project them to society and not take this matric thing too falsely and let everybody think that that is some magic key that opens the world to you. It's not. There's lots of opportunity in these other crafts.
Okay, just you were going to say.
No, I was
drop in
just
a
saying
comment.
that I think we need technicons, that's what you call it, technicons, or vocational training, where because when I was working in the hydrogen fuel cell sector, then one of the equipment suppliers was saying that we do have all the engineers, but they really don't know. They do know the theories, but they do not know how to handle an exact equipment. So I think we need specialities in of engineers in services and after-sales services.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're running out of time here. It's been a very robust debate. I'm sure that it's given a lot of people an insight to the future. Thank you very much to my guests, Dr. Stephen Lennon from Eskom, Radhika Perrot from MISTRA, Dr. Kelvin Kemm from Stratek, and Andre Otto from SANEDI. That's the end of another episode of Power Talk. Until next time, from me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.